think we'll still have a few people trickling in over the next couple minutes here, but we'll go ahead and get started with our workshop today. So welcome back, everyone. My name is Nicole Barbera. I'm the Director of Communications, Marketing, and Events here at Heterodox Academy. We are grateful that you all have taken the time today to join us for this workshop on public writing, hosted by Musa al-Gharbi, who is here today to share all of his wisdom on public writing with you. Before I hand the Zoom window over to Musa, I just want to have a few reminders for folks here in the room. As always, we appreciate your membership here at Heterodox Academy, and our organization and our mission only grows with the more members that we have. So please do refer your colleagues and academic friends to join. It just takes a few minutes online. So please do that whenever you feel compelled to recommend that your colleagues join HxA. In addition, as many of you know, and many of you are probably registered for, we do have our annual conference being hosted in Brooklyn, New York, June 23rd through 25th. Musa will also be there as many members are presenting. We have over 100 speakers. We'll have live in-person workshops, panel discussion, main stage plenary events, research presentation, teaching presentations. So it'll be a really great time, in addition to lots of social and networking events. So if you have not already, please do consider registering, and we would love to see you in New York this summer. All right. Now over to the reason that we are all here. I'm going to very soon hand the floor over to Musa here, who is a fellow at HxA. He's also a current professor of journalism and communications at Stony Brook University, and he was also the previous HxA Director of Communications. So following in his footsteps here in my role, he's been published in lots and lots of places, including the New York Times, Washington Post, The Atlantic, CNN, Nation, The Guardian, The New Republic, and many other prominent outlets. So he's wonderful to be leading this workshop today. And he also, as you can see behind him over his shoulder there, he has his first book, We Have Never Been Woke, The Cultural Contradictions of a New Elite, which was published in October 2024 by Princeton University Press. So he is definitely the man to be leading this panel today. So with that, Musa, I'll turn it over to you and let you get started.
All right, so let me unmute myself. Okay, first task achieved. Now let me share my screen and we'll see how that works out. Okay, great.
Great.
I don't know why yours looks better than mine did too. Okay, so if you can go to the first slide. All right, so actually I don't need to go over this slide. I had a really great introduction. Yeah, so I write for a lot of places. I've done a lot of work, not just writing for the public myself, but helping other people write in place outlets in other places, and I have a book out and so on. Great. Okay, so I'll just start by saying public writing is very different from the kind of writing that we're often trained to do as academics. So for one thing, clarity, concision, directness, accessibility, engagement, like having a compelling work, these are all prized in a way that they're not in academic writing. It flexes kind of different muscles. Now, there are some advantages of this. One of the advantages is that when you have to explain something to people in a concise, accessible, compelling way, it often helps you notice kind of flaws and limitations in your own thinking and understanding of issues that are maybe easier to ignore. Oh, just okay. That are maybe easier to ignore when you're writing in academic articles. It can be easier to gloss over that sort of stuff. When you're writing for the public, you got a tight timeline. It quickly becomes apparent where there are kind of gaps in your own thinking. So writing for the public is a good way to actually sharpen and deepen your own understanding of ideas. One thing to note, though, and to keep front of mind, is that read-through rates are very low. Almost no one clicks on links as well. So if you have something to say, something that you want readers to take away with and reckon with and read, it's important to just put it in the body of the text rather than trying to outsource a ton of stuff to links. You can't really rely on footnotes or endnotes and parentheticals, putting stuff in parentheses is often frowned upon as well. So you should structure the essay in such a way as that all the main ideas are in the body of the post. And in terms of sequencing, the best way to structure arguments and ideas is to follow what journalists call the inverted pyramid. So you want to lead with the most critical information, the main thing that you want people to take away, the key things that you want to inform people about. You need to put those things right up front, and then kind of move towards other information that's maybe important and useful, but kind of like less central to and going on down towards the end of the essay. Because again, read-through rates are low. If people are only going to read maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs of the full essay that you wrote, make sure that they get what they need, what you want them to get out of those 2 to 3 paragraphs. My read-through rates are pretty great, actually, but according to The Guardian. And I can talk a little bit about how to have people who start an essay actually finish it if you'd want. But like the default assumption should be that if your essay gets published, most people who start your essay probably aren't going to finish it. So foreground the stuff that you want people to take away right off the bat. In order to have people keep reading, it's important to minimize jargon. If you do use jargon or abbreviations or anything like that, anytime you introduce the term, you should briefly describe what it means. But still, you should not use too many technical terms. Things like intellectual digressions and academic flourishes, which often take place in journals, you can't really do. And so it's important to be, again, kind of direct, clear, concise. In terms of audience that you think of in your head as you're writing, the best way I found to, the kind of sweet spot is to assume that you're writing for like bright undergraduate students. So don't assume that you're writing mostly for other people with, advanced degrees or other people who know anything about your field. Assume that the people you're writing for probably don't know much about your specific field, and just kind of write as you would for a bright undergraduate student in a lower division course. In terms of your voice, when you're writing, you should have a kind of conversational style. In fact, a good way to check and make sure if the flow of the essay is good and if it's accessible, and to kind of detect weird bits of language and stuff like that, is sometimes to read your essay out loud as you're editing it. But in general, the sound of the essay should flow more like a conversation than a dissertation when you're doing public-facing writing. And one other thing that's important that relates to the inverted pyramid is that people communicate for a reason. And what you should be aware of as you're structuring your essay and writing your essay is like, what are the goals and objectives that you have for why you wrote this essay? What is it you're trying to accomplish? What is it that you want people to think or to feel or to do as a result of having read this essay? Keep that front of mind. Let that kind of guide what you prioritize and what you don't, what you put the heaviest emphasis on, what you put first, and so on, and how things sequence from there. Next slide, please. As far as the basics, when you're writing for the public, in general, the length should be somewhere between 700 and 1,200 words. Once you get beyond that, it can be tough to place it. Especially anything over 2,000 words, and it's considered long form. And there's a pretty constrained set of publications that publish that kind of content. And in general, even after you get over 1,000 words, you really have to justify the length and be able to hold reader attention. So a lot of editors, if you send them something that's 1,600 words or something like that, they're going to probably tell you to edit it down, or might just pass it over because they don't want to. The editors also don't want to read something that's needlessly long. So really try to keep it under 1,200 words. Be ruthless with cutting. One tactic that I adopt to help me with cutting, so I'm not, because oftentimes if people put a lot of effort into producing these bodies of text, and they have interesting facts and interesting research and interesting links to things, then just taking that content and throwing it in the trash can be kind of hard emotionally and otherwise. So what I do is I try not to waste any work that I did. When I'm editing an essay, if I cut content, I usually take that cut content and then dump it into a separate file. Doing that, I have like a graveyard file. Doing that is useful for a bunch of reasons. One, if I know that this content that I'm cutting isn't just going in the trash, it makes it easier for me to, again, not be precious about the things that are on the page. I can cut more easily. I'm less attached to the stuff that's on that page. And then two, often if I take things that are cut from multiple essays and dump them in this document, I can start to see connections, and often I can make another essay out of the things that I cut and publish a second essay somewhere else. There's no need to waste content that you cut from essays, but you should be kind of ruthless about cutting to get it under the 1,200 word mark. To guide your cuts and to guide the structuring of the essay in general, the ideal way to do this kind of an essay is that you should have your main point up front. By the end of the first paragraph, I'll talk about this in a minute, people should have a good sense of what your overall argument is. After that, every subsequent paragraph should make one distinct point, and every sentence in that paragraph, a distinct point that helps tie back to the main thing that you're arguing. And every single sentence within that paragraph should tie back to that point of the paragraph, which again feeds into the main thing that you're arguing. Anything that doesn't directly help advance the point of the paragraph can be cut. And any paragraphs that aren't tightly connected to advancing the core argument of the piece are candidates for cuts, especially if you're over length. If you aggressively cut, if you like are aggressively work to get it under 1,200, but you still end up with like 2,000 words, and you think that all of the paragraphs do tie into the argument and all of the sentences do tightly advance the point of the paragraphs and so on, but you're still over length. But one thing you can do is you can break up the essay into multiple pieces. So for instance, I produced an essay that went kind of viral for Compact magazine originally, called Wokeism is Winding Down. I pulled together a lot of data showing that this period of rapid unrest that we saw that started after 2010 seemed to have peaked around 2021 and is now on the decline. We're not back to 2009, but like the declines are obvious. And so the initial version of this essay that I produced was too long. So what I did is I broke it into a few pieces. So the initial piece that I published with Compact was a kind of general introduction to the idea. I took a subset of the research that I did looking at trends in academic journals and things like this, and I published that as a separate piece on Heterodox Academy. And then I took some of the work from both of those essays and additional thoughts that I had about this and published that as a separate article for the Liberal Patriot called The Great Awakening of Higher Ed Has Ended, but Is It Too Late? So I got 3 essays. The initial essay I produced was too long, so I broke it into 3 essays, and I had them. An advantage of doing that is if you sequence them well and structure them well, then you can have each of the subsequent essays after the first one gets published. You can have the second essay linked to the first essay after it comes out, and so and maybe even mention it. And so then the second essay, in addition to having its own success, helps drive more clicks and attention for the first essay, and the same thing with the third one, right? So they can mutually reinforce one another. So that's always one idea, break it into multiple pieces. In general, when you're writing, you should aim for short sentences. So if there's any time in a sentence where you have a semicolon or a comma, try replacing it with a period. And like you want to keep your sentences short. Any empirical claim that you make in the essay that is not common knowledge, you want to hyperlink to a source for it. So if you say Donald Trump is the president of the United States, you don't need to link to that. That's common knowledge. But if you talk about some, if you make a claim about how research shows that DEI training typically doesn't achieve its stated goal. That's something that people like us widely know, but that is contestable, and that a lot of that is contestable, especially for people who are not specialists in this literature, and that is not widely known, maybe outside of relevant fields. So that's the kind of thing that you'd want to have a hyperlink source for. The same thing for any direct quotes. If you reference any particular work, like as Orwell said in The Road to Weak and Pure or something like that, you want to make sure you link to that work. Ideally, you want to connect people to primary sources. This is important, especially outlets that are kind of prestigious, like the Washington Post. They tend to have copy editors who go through the text when it's getting ready for publication. And if there are links that don't go to credible primary sources, then they'll often kick it back for more edits, and sometimes even just reject the piece if the sourcing is bad. So make sure that you use as often as possible credible primary sources. And in general, try to show rather than tell. So things like anecdotes, providing concrete examples of the thing that you're talking about tend to be much more effective at capturing and holding people's imagination and attention. If you have things like graphs and charts and tables, that can save you a lot of word count, and also it tends to generate a lot more interest in holding people's attention and getting their engagement. And in fact, as it relates to social media shares and things like this, people often take the graphs and tables and the charts, and those are the things that they end up sharing on social. Images as well. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. It's not quite that much. But it can definitely save you word count and help people invest more in the story that you're trying to tell. So if there's some kind of image that you have rights to, that can also be an effective way. All right. One thing that you should understand about public writing is that rejection is a huge part of the game. Rejection doesn't necessarily indicate anything bad about you as a writer or a person, or even necessarily, it doesn't even necessarily indicate anything bad about the work. So often, when people get started in public-facing writing, they have this assumption that how publication works is that there's a kind of meritocratic bar that you have to clear in terms of quality. So if you write an essay that's good enough for the New York Times, then the New York Times will take it. That's not, and therefore they assume that if their piece doesn't get accepted, then that's some kind of signal that their work is deficient, and maybe even the author is deficient. But that's not the case. That's not the way it works. In reality, editors get way more high quality submissions than they can plausibly use, and that gets truer and truer the kind of more competitive the outlet is. And so they have to reject a whole bunch of articles. Editors reject articles all the time that they think are good, that are a good fit for the publication, that, it's just they have other essays that are also good and a good fit for the publication. They can only publish so many, and they want to go with this one instead. And so especially if they receive multiple essays on the same topic, even if they're very good, they're only going to usually publish one or maybe two essays on that topic. They're not going to accept most of them that they receive. Or even if the essay is really good, but just not well calibrated for that specific publication and its style or the specific audience that that publication has, then even if it's a great essay, it can get rejected. The problem is readers don't often see the rejections. All you see is the publications. And so if you look at someone like me and you see I'm published here, I'm published there, published, it can be easy to think that I'm just, pew, pew, pew. I'm just, batting 1,000. Everything I publish just, gets accepted and is very successful and all of that. In reality, even established writers deal with rejection all the time. I deal with rejection all the time. Everyone else I know who's in this business deals with rejection all the time. And most of the work that you produce is also not impactful, but that's a side note. You have these small number of essays that are. And so even pieces that go kind of viral and are very successful often were rejected from multiple places before. So as an example, I produced an essay that was looking at the prevalence and distribution of anti-Semitic attitudes and behaviors in the United States. It was an essay that provided important context for a very important pressing issue. I had a hard time publishing it for a bunch of reasons. It's a longer piece, it's a nerdy, wonky piece, whatever. But I sat on this essay for like a month trying to find a place for it, pitching it, getting rejected, pitching it, getting rejected. And then eventually it got picked up by Matt Iglesias for his Slow Boring blog, which fortunately has a readership as large as a lot of major national outlets. And it blew up. It was a hugely successful piece in terms of clicks, engagement, influence on the public discussion, and so on and so forth. And so the fact that an essay gets rejected, even if it gets rejected over a long period of time, doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad essay or that it won't be successful. It just means the circumstances weren't quite right for it to find a home, for it to find that particular home. And so the upshot of this is that getting published is largely about running the odds. You just have to take shots. You produce the best essay that you can, you pitch it, it gets rejected. That's kind of the modal outcome of pitching something is rejection. And then if you get a rejection, you adjust it, especially if you got feedback or further thoughts or whatever, you adjust it and tweak it a little bit, and you pitch it out to the next person. And so even as you're writing, as you're getting ready to pitch an outlet, and I'll talk about pitching shortly, you should have in mind kind of, if this person rejects it, where's the next person that I'm going to send it to? You should just have a plan B and maybe a plan C in mind before you even pitch it to your plan A outlet. Next slide, please. One thing that's an adjacent point that's critical to understand is that editors are not going to spend a lot of time on your piece at the time of submission. So you might think or hope that what editors will do when they get a piece is they sit there and they read it carefully and thoughtfully. They give it a really close read and they kind of deliberate about it and they carefully weigh its merits before deciding whether to pass it on it or not. That's not true. That's not the way it works. Often, editors are just totally inundated with submissions, most of which they can't use. Their main job is to take the pieces they actually are going to run with and turn them into high quality pieces that are very successful. That's where they devote most of their time and energy. Working through submissions is actually, most of which they can't accept, is actually kind of the drag part of their job. It's something that they try to dedicate the least amount of time and energy to. And in fact, they often outsource that to lower level editors to work through the slush pile. And this is especially true if you email a general inbox. So if you do like submissions at newyorktimes.com, there is a 100% chance that the person who reads your essay first is not going to be someone who has the ability to actually approve and publish your essay. It'll be a lower level editor. And so this is what you don't want to do typically in pitching is send things to general inboxes like submissions at newyorktimes.com, because when you do that, there's just a whole bunch of veto points. So what ends up happening is you have a lower level person who reads it, they reject most of the things that they read, and then they kick a smaller subset of them up to another editor, and then that editor takes a smaller subset of all the things that are kicked up to them, rejects most of them, and accepts a smaller number of, and it's usually that editor or one above them who has the ability to actually commission a piece and authorize its publication. And so what you want to do as a writer, especially because there is a lot of arbitrariness in the process, is minimize the amount of veto points. So rather than sending to general inboxes, you want to try to target specific editors who have the ability to actually commission your piece when you're trying to get it published. And another thing that's important about this point, about how editors don't spend a lot of time on most submissions that they get at the initial stage, is that a strong first impression is very important, especially the pitch and the opening paragraphs. And I'll talk about that right now, if you can move to the next slide. So the opening paragraphs, as I said, super, super, super important, both for getting an editor to publish a piece and also for getting readers to actually read your piece if it gets accepted. By the end of the first paragraph, readers should have a strong sense of what the overall argument is and why they should care about it. So the core thesis up front and why the thesis matters. Editors are looking for a reason to stop reading. Again, they have a lot of stuff to do. They would rather not read a bunch of essays all the way to the bottom. And so often what ends up happening is if an editor is reading your piece and they're not hooked by the initial paragraphs, they'll just reject the piece and move on to the next one. This is actually a good heuristic on their part. It's not actually a bad thing. It's smart. Because if you can't hold the editor's attention, someone whose job it is to read a bunch of media and edit a bunch of journalistic output, someone who's so passionate about this work that they're literally dedicating their lives to it. If you can't interest that guy, you're certainly not going to interest, rando who comes across your essay and you're competing for their attention against Netflix, TikTok, and other books that they could be reading and so on. If you can't hold an editor's attention, you have zero chance of holding the reader's attention. So this is one of the things that editors look for is, are you holding their attention? Are the opening paragraphs compelling and strong? If they're not, you're going to almost certainly get a rejection. So put a lot of care into how you design the opening paragraph. So as an example, I wrote an essay for Compact magazine that also went kind of super viral. The opening of it is here on the screen, but you can see that what I do is I kind of, I start by illustrating this by emphasizing this broad point about analyzing society. And by the end of the first paragraph, I trace out every single one of the, like there's a few subsections in the essay, they're all signaled to by the end of the first paragraph. So I have a section that looks at how students' sincere but contradictory concern for the least among us are paired with their ambitious social climbing on the other hand. I have a section on how elite institutions have these deep commitments to purely sterile forms of activism and so on and so forth. So I basically map out the entire essay over the course of a paragraph. The essay was very successful and successful at getting people to read it all the way through, in part because it has this kind of a structure that makes it easy to follow and flow and easy for people to get invested in. Early paragraphs, very important. Next slide, please. And so an ideal story, if you're trying to pitch to public outlets, what you want is something that's, this kind of interesting balance. So editors are looking for something that's specific, that's unusual, that's distinct, that's different from all the other essays out there. That's not just a generic essay about free speech in general, but has some kind of, for instance, interesting hook tied to a particular place, tied to a particular community, tied to a particular subfield or sub-issue or something like this. But they're also looking for stories that have relevance beyond the specific characters and communities that are focused on kind of more general or enduring aspects of people and societies. They're looking for something that's relevant right now, that has some kind of, that speaks to the moment, but that also will have a kind of shelf life and will hold up well 6 months from now. That it's not going to be a kind of essay that people are going to look on 3 months from now and go, oh, wow, that guy got it totally wrong. And they're looking for something that helps readers see something new, something that kind of broadens their horizons or leads them to pay attention to something that they had been ignoring or see something that they took for granted in a new light. Essays that do any of these things tend to be really compelling for editors kind of across publications, no matter where you're trying to publish. Next slide. As far as writing advice, the hardest part is getting something on the page. I always tell people, you can improve anything, but you can't do anything with nothing. So it's important to try to just get things on the page instead of being overly concerned with, is it good before you get it down and then make it good. Me personally, my approach to writing is I like to build out articles kind of over a period of time. So what I do is if I have some ideas that are kind of percolating in my head, I'll often create a file and get those thoughts down. And then over time, as I continue thinking about this topic and other thoughts come to mind, I'll drop them into the same file, and then maybe I'll start moving them around a little bit. And you can start to see a kind of an argument that takes shape or an essay that starts to take shape. Sometimes I'll often talk to people if I'm mulling over something that I'm thinking about turning into an article. I'll often just strike up conversations with people about that topic so I can kind of test my ideas out on them and kind of also get their thoughts and objections and concerns and so on. Sometimes I'll do threads on social media. In fact, I just did one today. I'm thinking about writing this article about weird culture and conservatism and the extent to which they can work together, what conservative means in weird cultures. Anyway, so I have this kind of thought that I'm playing with right now. I did a tweet thread exploring the idea. I'm kind of seeing what the response looks like, what the questions are. This is a good way of kind of piloting thoughts. But eventually, I'll feel like I have a bead on the piece after I bounce it off of people and think about it a long time and kind of tweak the thing. And then that's when I sit down and try to whip it into prose. I don't sit down and try to produce tight prose immediately. For me, as a busy person who's juggling 17 things, that's a big lift. If I just sat down at the computer and tried from nothing to produce tight prose. So doing this kind of gradual building over a couple of, over a week or 2 weeks sometimes, and then not trying to actually sit down and write the piece per se until you have a good beat on it is a way that I've found to be really productive despite all of the other stuff I have going on. Adopting a method like this can lower the bar for productivity, and it's, yeah. Okay, so yeah, don't overthink about getting the whole essay down in a single sitting, would be my advice. Just put some stuff into files as it comes to you and see what develops. That would be my advice for productivity. Next slide. One thing that's important as you're writing the piece is to try to tailor the message for your intended audience. So you should try to have a subset of people and publications in mind as you're writing. You know, again, people communicate for reasons. If you should think about what your communication goals are, what is it you're trying to accomplish, and who would you need to convince or persuade or mobilize in order to achieve those goals. And that should guide kind of where you want to publish and how you structure the essay. Once you have a target publication in mind, you should scan that publication and see what other people are writing on that topic before you try to submit to them. First, to avoid redundancy, because again, if someone has made a similar argument on a similar topic in that same publication recently, you're probably going to get a rejection no matter how good your own essay is, because it's just redundant. Or alternatively, if you're doing an essay that's kind of related to another essay that's published, but has a significantly different spin, or is in fact in some ways contradictory to it, or kind of complements it, builds on it in an interesting way, then you can often refer to that piece somewhere in your own piece. Editors do like that. They like it if you end up adding links or references to other things that are already on their site, because again, it drives more clicks to the stuff they've already published. In general, you need some kind of a hook at the beginning that's kind of tied to the present, but you should also write for posterity. What I tell people is that anything has the possibility to be interesting, right? So for instance, if you study some obscure insect, there's usually some reason why you came to study this unique insect, as Michael Polanyi flagged in his book, Personal Knowledge. You know, people aren't randomly allocated our topic areas, our areas of study. We choose them, and we usually choose them because there's usually some interesting story into how we came to study the things that we did. There's usually some interesting thing that we find that we are passionate about that kind of draws us to dedicate our lives and so much of our time to understanding and researching these social phenomena. The key to writing an effective piece of public work on this is to try to help other people see what you see, what it is that you find so compelling and interesting that you dedicated years of your life to studying this thing. Why? To the extent that you can help people see this and that you can be mindful of it yourself, it can be really easy. You can write a topic on just about anything and get people invested in it if you can, translate that spark. So one example, a colleague of mine, Tyler Austin Harper, is a passionate fisherman, and he wrote this. He discovered here on Long Island there's this kind of unique form of fishing that people do, and that fishing has become more dangerous because of climate adjustments and so on. There's more sharks in the water, for instance, things like this. And so he went and fished with these folks, and he found it interesting. and then wrote an Atlantic story about it. They found the way that he structured it, he was able to get other people curious and interested in this, was able to explain the relevance, how this kind of unique fascination of his relates to a whole bunch of other issues that people already care about. And so not only was this piece picked up and published by the Atlantic, they even sent a professional photographer with him to Long Island so he can go do this fishing again and they can document it and so on and so forth. And so the upshot is pretty much anything can be interesting and successful as an essay for the public. The trick is to find an angle, an entryway into it that's kind of accessible and compelling for people who aren't specialists, and to help people, to invite people to see what it is about this topic that makes you so passionate and interested in it. And the last thing I'll say about tailoring your message for your audience is that it's important, if you're making some kind of moral or political goal argument, to be aware of who your likely audience is, and you should understand that there are kind of trade-offs to taking a particular moral or political position in an article, in terms of which publications are willing to publish it and how people will receive it. Next slide. Okay, we should be coming up on the end here. Yeah. In terms of navigating the kind of heightened moral and political period of contestation we're in right now, sometimes people who are concerned about the culture wars and kind of navigating the culture wars end up trying to avoid putting them being too transparent about what they think and feel by being really obscurant and kind of vague and indirect about what it is they're trying to argue. That's a mistake. It's a mistake for a bunch of reasons. First, because if you're not just direct about what it is you want to say, it can be easy for people to misunderstand. Again, readers are not going to be generally careful readers who are dedicating tons of time and attention to carefully parsing your essay. And so if you do this kind of obscurant, indirect kind of thing, it can be really easy for people to just totally misunderstand your argument or misrepresent you and what you're about and what you believe. It also tends to make for like crappy prose. So editors and readers both want directness. They want you to have a distinctive voice. They want you to be writing for somewhere. They want you to have a perspective and a pulse. So you should just say what you mean. But just saying what you mean, having a view, doesn't mean you have to be a partisan cheerleader. It doesn't mean you have to be a zealot or a demagogue. So if you read my work, for instance, I clearly have a view on anything that I write about, but I'm difficult to put it into a particular box. So David Brooks, in writing about my book for the New York Times, says, I can't really tell what al-Gharbi's politics are. Some mixture of positions from across the spectrum, maybe. A reader on my Substack said, whatever genre this is, I think it's my favorite. Clearly argued, socially situated, to the point, somewhat snarky, but still polite. So, you can have a view, you can have a perspective, you can argue for the things that you believe in, but without becoming a culture warrior or a demagogue or engaging in this kind of thing. The key is to try to shed light instead of heat. So try to conduct yourself as a scholar. So if you're writing and you have a byline that's, I'm a professor of blah at my university, then you should sound like a scholar when you should conduct yourself as a scholar when you're writing. You should make your case with evidence and argument and stick kind of close to the facts. Don't overclaim. You should demonstrate fair-mindedness and intellectual charity. So if you're talking about people who belong to a camp that, that's not your camp, you should be engaging with them and their perspectives and thoughts in a reasonable way, especially if one of the things you're frustrated by is you feel like they don't do the same to you. In general, it's more effective to try to speak to people in terms of their own values, their own narratives, and their own frames of reference. I can unpack that during the Q&A if people want, but I don't. In general, it's good to, especially when you're engaging with different audiences and in highly contested spaces, it can be really effective rather than trying to foreground differences and things you disagree with people about, to try to instead start by emphasizing shared goals, common interests, superordinate identities, You can get into the differences then. It's a matter of sequencing. If you start by foregrounding the things that you have in common with your audience or your interlocutors, it makes it easier to get into the differences without people feeling kind of threatened by it. I can talk about that more as well. In general, you should avoid things like catastrophism and hyperbole, both for factual reasons, because hyperbolic and catastrophic statements are usually false, importantly false. But second, because they're also just not usually effective at achieving people's goals. So there's a lot of research on this. I have an article from the Washington Post that connects to a bunch of peer-reviewed empirical research on this point. People often rely on catastrophizing language because they think it'll jolt people into action and spur people into doing something. In fact, it tends to have the opposite effect. When people tend to, if you successfully convince someone that a catastrophe is unfolding in front of them, they tend to get pretty fatalistic about it and go, oh, well, crap, there's nothing I can do. Guess I'll just, So it tends to demobilize people. Catastrophism is actually really ineffective as a strategy. What's more effective is trying to suggest to people alternatives to try to make problems seem significant but tractable, and so on and so forth. In general, you should try to engage with inconvenient facts and present complex and ambivalent pictures of things. So if you read that essay about, say, the Gaza protesters at Columbia, I present very complex and nuanced pictures of the protesters and so on. People often don't do this. They don't acknowledge inconvenient facts or paint pictures of people that they don't like in ambivalent ways or acknowledge flaws in people and institutions they do like because they think it will weaken their argument. In fact, again, it's the opposite. There's just a ton and ton of empirical research on this. If people are willing to foreground these kind of inconvenient details, it actually makes people more likely to believe you and trust you and follow your argument than if you don't do that. Last thing I'll say about this is like putting yourself out there does entail some risks, as I know firsthand. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. But it can also provide a lot of benefits, both for you and for your institutions, and for the kind of broader social dynamics. It's really important. I'm going to write my next book after the book I'm currently working on. It's going to be all about public sociology and why it's important and how it totally transforms fields and why it's important for society and so on. Okay, next slide. I think that's, oh crap, this is actually an important point. In terms of timing, I usually write slightly off cycle. So when I don't usually try to produce an article that's like, as something breaks, I'm going to do the initial take on that article. The reason I don't do that is because when a story first breaks, editors will usually get a flood of submissions with people offering first takes. Most of those takes are the same. And so you're often competing with a whole bunch of other people who are arguing the same thing as you, which makes the prospects of your essay getting published very low. On top of that, the early takes often suck in retrospect because usually new information comes to light. There's new details that play out that change how we evaluate the older stuff. And people think about issues more deeply, and so they have a more sophisticated understanding of the issue. So rather than producing that kind of stuff that's probably not going to hold up well and that I'll feel bad about in retrospect, what I usually do is wait until others have weighed in for a bit. This lets me see what other people have said, and more importantly, it also lets me see what other people haven't said, kind of gaps in the discourse, places where the discourse has gone awry. And so this allows me to make a unique contribution and a more valuable contribution to the discussion, and to produce a kind of work that's going to hold up over a longer period of time. There are trade-offs there too. If you wait too long, for instance, sometimes editors will be more inclined to pass on it. The less timely it is, the more interesting it has to be in order to get it accepted. But again, if you're writing at the same time as everyone else, chances are high that other people will be pitching the editor with the same take as you, and there's a high chance that your work won't look as good downstream. And so there's just trade-offs. It's trade-offs all the way down. But for me, I usually write a little bit off cycle. Next slide. A note on editing. After your piece is accepted, it's almost certainly not going to just get published in the form that you sent it to the editor in. the editorial process is intended to be both collaborative and adversarial. Collaborative in the sense that you should trust your editor's judgment. They know your audience, they know the publication, they know what works and what doesn't. Their core priority is to make sure that the work, that if they accept your work and they publish your work is as successful as it can be and reflects as well as it can on you and the publication. So that's the sense in which editing is collaborative. It's adversarial in the sense, though, that you should be mindful that at the end of the day, it's your name and your reputation that are at stake. If the editors are often not experts in your field and your subject matter, and so they can end up making cuts or rephrasing things in ways that create problems for you or that are actually not accurate and things like this. And so you should have no problem pushing back on that. They expect that, they respect that. You don't have to accept all the changes that editors propose, but you do have to show that you took their proposals into consideration. So usually if an editor changes something, there's just something about that sentence that doesn't quite work. So even if you don't leave the sentence the way the editor changed it, you should change something about it. You should show that you took their suggestion seriously. Or you can reject it, but explain why you rejected it. Full stop. Ultimately, the final product is usually a kind of merger between your initial vision and the editor's vision. You should accept that. In terms of the pitch, what a pitch looks like when you're emailing the editor, it should be short. What you need is a couple sentences detailing the argument, an explanation of why the essay is important or interesting and timely, a sentence or two about why you're a good person to write this, and if they haven't worked with you before, maybe 2 lines or so about your bio. All of these together should be like 5 to 7 sentences. As I say to my students, editors don't want to read an essay about your essay. They also don't want your life story. Mostly they just want to know whether they should keep reading or not, and how they should go into it. Should they go into it optimistically or pessimistically? If you can't send your pitch with concision, editors are going to feel kind of dread before they click on your attachment. So the pitch is also very important. You want them to go into it positively predisposed. I have an example here of an essay that I pitched on behalf of HxA President John Tomasi that did get published by Inside Higher Ed. I pitched it on his behalf, and you can see the structure of it here. It's short. It does exactly this. That's kind of the structure of how you want pitches to look. Next slide. Yeah, so elements of a good pitch is that your pitch should have high quality prose. Your pitch should convince the editor that it's a good fit for the audience and the publication of that outlet. Your pitch should be something different than what everyone else is saying. Your pitch should convince the editor that the piece is likely to perform well in the moment and possibly have a decent shelf life. On the other hand, if the editor walks away from your pitch thinking that the piece is outdated or disconnected or from the conversation, they're going to reject it. If they think it's redundant with other pieces or not interesting, they're going to reject it. If they think it's like super niche and unlikely to kind of get a lot of interest, they're going to reject it. If your argument seems undercooked, if you're trying to describe your argument in 2 to 3 sentences and it seems incoherent or kind of undercooked, then it's going to get rejected. And if they read your essay or your pitch and think that in order to get it, even if they think it has potential, but it would take a ton of work from them and their team to get it up to standard, so that it meets the criteria for their outlet, they'll probably reject it. So those are some things that distinguish a good pitch from a bad pitch. Next. Final pitching advice. You generally want to pitch it when the essay is finished. So you don't usually want to pitch them just an idea. You want to send the full attached essay so that if they're interested in it, they can just go on to reading it immediately. You should try to, again, as I mentioned, you want to try to connect to editors directly instead of going through general inboxes or submission forms. There's a bunch of ways you can do this. You can go to the masthead for the website. They often have the editors' names and emails for the different sections. Sometimes you can find them on social media, and editors will have their emails available in their bios on social media. Sometimes you can just learn the structure of the emails at that place. So for instance, At Heterodox Academy, everyone's email address is their last name at heterodoxacademy.com. So even if you didn't know Nicole's email address, you can just type her last name at heterodoxacademy.com and email Nicole. Please don't bombard her with emails though. In general, and this is true basically everywhere. If you know someone who's published with that outlet before, sometimes you can have them pitch on your behalf. So again, I pitch pieces regularly on behalf of other people. Editors like that. If someone that they know knows what they're looking for, says, hey, I came across this piece, I think it's a good fit, they tend to take that very seriously. In general, you should try to pitch on Tuesday through Thursday. On weekends, editors are often off, more or less, not really, but they're less on. On Mondays, they're usually trying to catch up on stuff from the weekend. On Fridays, they're usually trying to close everything out frantically for the weekend. So those are usually bad days to pitch them. Try to pitch them Tuesdays through Thursdays. Editors usually expect a window of exclusivity. So you shouldn't usually send it to 17 people at once. Send it to one person, give them some time to think it over, about a week. If you do send it to multiple people because it's a time-sensitive thing, you should tell the editor that. There's nothing editors hate more than if they invest in your piece and they say, oh yeah, okay, I want it. And you go, oh, well, crap, so-and-so already accepted it. Yeah, okay, next slide. Okay, great. So I'm now at the end of the formal slides. I went a little longer than I had hoped, significantly longer than I had hoped. Next slide, please. So we'll go to Q&A. I'm happy to stay a little bit longer so that people have some time to ask questions. One thing that I'll note, please, when you have a question, try to keep it relatively concise so that other people can also ask questions. And if it's a really specialized question, this might, for a very particular kind of work that you're doing, maybe this isn't the right forum for that. So I have my email address up here as well as my website and my Substack. So feel free to connect with me kind of downstream. But for right now, I'll try to have kind of concise questions that are kind of relevant for possibly a number of people. Okay. Thank you for your time and attention. Looking forward to the discussion.
I have a question.
Oh, shoot. Go ahead. Go for it, Ken.
You've written a lot of these articles, and I know it's because you have something to say, but do you get compensated at all for these? Is it in general true that people write articles to get compensation?
Yeah. So I pretty much always write. I pretty much always get paid. The amount that you get paid varies from outlet to outlet. So like at the New York Times, if you publish there, they can afford to pay you less because they're the New York Times. So they usually pay somewhere like $150. When I write for, but other places I write for, I can get $1,000, $2,000 for a piece. It really just depends on the place, and kind of you can negotiate depending on kind of whether or not you incurred costs to produce the piece, whether or not you have how much they want the piece, how much you make from other places, and so on. One thing that's important to flag, a lot of places, if you don't actually ask for money though, they often won't offer it to you. Because a lot of people, because there's so many people trying to break in, a lot of outlets have adopted this mentality that what they're giving you, their compensation to you is that they're, providing you a platform for your thoughts. So that's what they're paying you in as audience. But usually but most places do pay. The default is to pay. And so if you say, oh, okay, if they say, yeah, we want to run the piece, and you say, great, how much are you paying me? It's fine to ask that. You should ask that. Most places do pay. And if what they're offering you is weak, especially if you could make more money by pitching it somewhere else, or if you incurred costs in order to produce this piece that you should get compensated for, then it's perfectly fine to negotiate about salary. If an outlet wants a piece, they're probably not going to tell you to take a hike because you asked to get paid for it. But yeah, so I basically never publish anything for free. Yeah. Let's see. On the order of my screen, Josh Clements.
So I've worked on the local level as a journalist before, but I'm curious, is there any advice for moving? I would love to be in, Wall Street Journal or New York Times or the Atlantic. I mean, that's way, I work at a local institution. I would love to move to that level. So any advice on going to the next, outside of a regional area?
Yeah, so I'll say two things. First, the nice thing about if you've already published for smaller regionally focused places, that's great. That's great because you can point to this body of work that you've produced. They can see that you've done the thing, that someone has published you, that you're familiar with how to do this kind of work. So that's great. As far as scaling up, one bit of advice that I might give to make the transition, especially, has your reporting been more locally focused? Or has it just been for kind of more local outlets?
I'm more locally focused. Local. I was a stringer for a local newspaper for a while and that kind of thing.
Great, fantastic. So what I would, a good way to kind of make this leap would be to try, like if I was pitching to a national outlet and I have a background in local news, then what I might suggest doing is trying to take a national story and looking how it plays out in your local community, or going the other way, taking something that's happening in your local community and trying to explain, show how it has kind of national implications or ties out to some bigger set of issues or whatever. If you can do that, either scaling from the macro down or from the local out, and you have a background in local news, that's a kind of pitch that's probably going to be compelling to a lot of editors, especially when you're talking about your background there. So that might be a place where I'd suggest starting from. But either way, even if you're just trying to write a more nationally oriented news story, that's not focused on your local community in either way on the scalar thing. The simple fact that you have a portfolio of work to that you can refer back to and demonstrate. Do you have a website? Do you mind me asking? Do you have a personal website that has links to your work and things like this?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's great. So you should definitely mention that and link to it somewhere in your pitch so that they can check you out. The fact that you've already published for the public sends a strong signal that you produce the kind of work that can get published. And so, yeah, so I would go confidently. But in terms of specific advice, either try to take the national and make it and see how it plays out in the local, or try to take something local and show its implications for the national. That can be a great way to break in to a more national outlet.
All right, thank you.
Noreen?
Hi, thank you for this wonderful presentation. I'm an academic writer, and I have an advanced contract for a book that's an academic trade book. So it's a slight change in genre. One of the big things being you're allowed to bring personal experience, of course, into academic trade books. And so I was wondering, do you have any advice in terms of what's your strategy behind choosing personal narrative or personal examples in your pieces, and what's your strategy for framing them? Yeah,
for me personally, I don't love to get too personal usually. I'm kind of, I used to be a lot more secretive or, whatever, distant about relaying too much about me personally. I tried to focus on the ideas and that ended up blowing up in my face because it turns out that it does matter a lot. If you give more information about who you are and why it is you're doing the work you do, it does importantly transform kind of how people, the messenger does influence significantly how people interpret the message. And so before, for instance, when I was writing on national security and foreign policy issues, the fact that I wasn't upfront about the fact that, for instance, I'm from a military family and a military community, and the reason I do this work is because I had a twin brother who perished in Afghanistan. I know loss from war, and I'm trying to help prevent other people from experiencing a similar loss. Being more upfront about that information totally transformed how a lot of people responded to my critiques of US foreign policy, right? And so providing this personal information can be useful, especially in helping the audience kind of see where you're coming from and kind of defang some of their apprehensions. and concern. So you want to be strategic. I'll just say, I think you want to be strategic about about what you convey and how you convey it. In the opening to my book, I start with a couple of personal anecdotes, in part because it's a really nerdy text. It's kind of a high concept piece at points. And so what I try to do to give readers an entryway into seeing kind of how I came to be involved in these questions and kind of what motivated the book is I just start with a couple of really concrete, tight episodes of things that I witnessed as I transformed from being a shoe salesman to an Ivy League intellectual, and on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And so again, but most of the book, other than those anecdotes, after those initial anecdotes to help provide an entryway into it, there's not a lot of me in the book. I'm not constantly talking about me, my neighborhood, my community, my experiences. And so I think being really strategic, I think sometimes less is more. So it can be really valuable, especially for getting people to invest in you, to trust you, to see where you're coming from, to get a hook on the argument and why it's written. But just be really thoughtful and deliberative about it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Christine Danowski?
Yes, thank you so much for
And
an
then Julia,
excellent,
you're next. Sorry.
thank you very much for an excellent presentation. About 30 years ago, I was an assistant editor for a popular magazine that published mostly fiction, but also some opinion pieces. And there were many, many parallels between your presentation, Musa, and what I actually did. I cannot overestimate or overemphasize, the importance of that first paragraph. By the end of the first paragraph, I knew immediately whether or not I was going to accept a piece. And sometimes after reading the very first sentence. So that is absolutely critical. And far too many aspiring authors tend to send out the same submission to multiple outlets in the hopes that somebody is going to accept it. I would not do this, because clearly maybe your subject is outside the scope of that particular outlet and they're going to reject it for that reason.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to point that out, just to emphasize, I can't overestimate how critical that your first paragraph is to hook my attention, because I have 100 other submissions I need to get to by the end of the week.
Well,
So,
and that second point you made about how about not just trying to send it out generically to a bunch of different outlets is very important. So if you're mindful of a specific publication that you want it to go, so you're not writing for no one in particular. If you write something that's supposed to be for everyone, another way of saying that is that it's for no one in particular. And so that will often diminish its odds, because most magazines aren't like literally for everyone. They have a kind of very specific audience, a very specific focus, a very specific types of genre that they work in. And so it's important to really tailor the work for the kind of place that you want to publish, and to be really selective and thoughtful about who you target the work towards, rather than just kind of blasting it to lots of people after producing generic prose for no one in particular. And
yes, and that, I was going to say, that means familiarizing yourself with the publication you want, and know which types of articles they published.
Yeah, and then so similarly, the same argument that if you want to make a particular argument, the way you make that argument will be very, very different in terms of what you emphasize, how you structure it, and so on. If you're trying to write the essay for National Review versus if you're trying to write the essay for Jacobin versus if you're trying to write the essay for The Atlantic. And so it's just really, really important to have, really have a place in mind. And write for that place. And as Christine said, really familiarize yourself with that outlet, what they've published on this topic recently. All right, Julia, go for it.
I thank you for that great talk. There's so many resources. I love it. The thing I wanted to ask you is how to navigate the exclusivity thing if you pitch your work, because sometimes it's very time sensitive, and particularly if you email it to the generic email addresses of the big outlets, I kind of don't expect anything to come from that. If I communicate with the editor, I feel, of course, I want to first hear back and so on before I would go to another place, but is the same true if you use the generic emails? Because it seems like it takes forever, right, to find someone who will respond, and some won't even respond.
Yeah. I mean, before I was a Columbia academic, I was below a no for the New York Times, the Washington Post, and so on. I would pitch them. I was not even rejection worthy. And then all of a sudden, when I came to Columbia, they started reaching out to me to write for them. So network effects. Great. But yeah, so to get to your question, you should still have a window of exclusivity. If it's a really, really time sensitive piece, and you do need to, and you want to send it to multiple outlets, you can do that, but you should say that in the pitch. You should say, hey, it's really time sensitive, so I sent it to a few places and I'd appreciate a response, a quick up or down, as soon as you're able. If you say something like that, editors understand it and they're going to be more likely to respond to it quickly, especially if they like the piece. But in any event, if they're not going to be upset because you're transparent with them. What you don't want to do is just send a regular pitch like you would for a piece that does have exclusive, whatever, and it's not exclusive. That where they, one thing that you can do as well, if you've pitched it and you haven't heard back, then you can send a follow-up email. You can so what I usually do is I'll wait a week. If I haven't heard back from them yet, I'll send a follow-up. And that's fine. The editors aren't bothered by that. It's a perfectly reasonable, normal thing to do. Say, hey, I sent this about a week ago. Just wanting to know if you've had a chance to check it out yet. A quick up or down would be great because it's kind of timely, something like that. People understand that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly legitimate. So you can send a follow-up. You don't want to send several follow-ups. So if you wait a week and you send a follow-up and it's been a couple days and you haven't heard anything back, then you can just assume they don't want it and pitch to the next place.
Thank you.
Yeah. The queue is open, I think, unless there's someone with their hand up on page 2. Christine, go for it.
Hi, I was just wondering, in the context of your presentation, instead of aspiring authors pitching articles to editors, do editors ever commission or request pieces from established authors? For example, if I know that Musa is an expert on topic X, could I email you and say, hey, we're covering topic X and you've written a lot about this, would you be interested? And if so, how do we get ourselves established as experts in a particular area?
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, when I was at University of Arizona, when I was an undergrad, and a point of contention among the faculty was that when journalists wanted to interview people about topics, they often sought out comment from me instead of sitting faculty members. And faculty members got annoyed by that. Now, that annoyance is understandable on the one hand, but on the other hand, the reason why journalists reached out to me is because I was out in the public talking about these issues. So what journalists and editors don't typically do is they're not reading academic journals to see who published recently on this topic. They're not going to a lot of people's faculty pages and reading your bio on your faculty pages and kind of going through the publications that you've done to see if you've produced anything relevant on this topic. They're not going to do any of that. The cues they get for who is a good person to write on a topic or to comment on a topic is usually based on other things that person has done in the public. So there's this kind of virtuous cycle where if you write or speak on topics publicly regularly, then you get invited to write and speak more on those topics regularly. So I have editors that reach out to me all the time, asking me to write for them now. but that's partly because I've already established myself as a subject matter expert on a number of topics. The way you do that is to write consistently about a specific set of topics kind of over and over, and especially kind of novel, interesting takes in different outlets, or maybe in the same outlet over time, but kind of distinct takes that gain traction. The more you publish on one specific topic, the more likely you're going to be perceived of as a subject matter expert on that topic. Or sometimes you can just write one essay on that topic that goes super viral, and then people think you're a subject matter expert on it, even if you're not. But yeah, so the best way to have editors start pitching you instead of you pitching them is to just start writing and doing kind of public-facing talks and things like this on the topic. And it can be helpful to have a website and things like this as well, so that if someone Googles you, if they come across your name somehow and they Google you, they can get a lot of information quickly about kind of what you're about and what you might be well suited for and so on. Ken.
Yes, another question in the absence of others. The point you just made, where you get a reputation for commenting on social specialized areas, also ends up making you what's called now a public intellectual. So you're no longer a university intellectual like I am, but you're a public intellectual. And to me, that always seemed fraught with danger, the danger of being criticized and being your life being in the public and people talking about you. How do you handle that, and how are you comfortable with being someone who has something to say but also very exposed now in the public?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that the cost of doing business in the public is that you do have to be willing to get criticized. One nice thing about writing for the public is that you get feedback on the things you write immediately. So for academic stuff, you spend sometimes months producing a piece, and then you send it out and you have to wait months to hear back from it. And then you get your first rejection usually, or feedback in the case of an R&R, and then you revise it again, and then it takes months until you get a confirmation. And then even after it gets accepted, it's months until it's published. And then even after it's published, it's months until you find out if anyone even read it, or whether and how they engage with it in their own work. Academic writing, I mean, public writing, not like that. You go from submission to publication or rejection very fast, and then it gets published. It gets published very fast, and you get feedback pretty much immediately. And that feedback is often good, either in the form of praise or questions that help deepen your own understanding of the issue, or kind of push you to kind of think about something in a new light or from a new angle. But you also get a lot of kind of crappy feedback from people who are kind of really invested in culture wars, people who didn't read your essay that closely, people who just say random disparaging stuff to you that's unrelated to your essay. Like whenever I publish things, I published this essay about criticizing Kamala Harris. I got a bunch of Islamophobic crap in my comments on my social media, completely irrelevant to anything that I argued in the piece. So, that's the thing that you have to be, kind of prepared for. It's not usually that bad, though. I mean, especially if you're conducting yourself as a scholar, and you're trying to shed light rather than heat, and you're kind of making really factual based arguments and things like that, then even if you're arguing something that other people find bracing or inconvenient, they usually respond to you in a relatively measured way. And even if they respond to you in a crappy way, if you engage with them in a measured way, often you can help kind of change the tenor of that conversation. But yeah, you do have to be okay with that. And you have to have a little bit of a thick skin for rejection, because that's the modal outcome of submissions, and a thick skin for people sometimes responding in a negative way to your work. Yeah.
Thanks.
We are technically at time, but Musa, if you want to stay on longer, just let me know if there's any other questions, but we will officially say that, you are free to leave if you'd like, but feel free to stay on, Musa, if you have a few more minutes as well.
Yeah,
So
I've got a few more minutes if other people have questions. But if no one has questions, then I'll bow out. Maybe I'll do like in class and I'll call on someone.
All right, Musa,
All right,
I
it looks
think
like
you put your
people are-
contact information before, right? So if anyone does want to get in contact with you, you're all over the internet, so I'm sure they can they can find you.
Yeah, it's harder to
I
not
actually
find
did have
me.
a question if you can hear me.
Yeah, sure, go for it, Chris.
Sorry, I was looking for the raise hand button. I could not find it. So you talked about the difference between academic writing and writing for the public. Are there any transferable skills from academic writing to writing for the public that make it better?
That's interesting. I mean, there's definitely a lot of transferable skills that go the other way. So me getting better at for instance, conveying information to people in a concise, accessible fashion has improved my teaching a lot. So it hasn't just made me better at writing for the public, but talking to other not like undergrads or non-specialists. So if I get better at communicating things to non-specialists in a concise, compelling, accessible way, that's great for my teaching too. In terms of aspects of being an intellectual that you can take to the public sphere, I think, again, a focus on trying to discipline conversations with facts and data or rigorous theoretical, and kind of rigorous logical approaches to describing and thinking about whatever it is you're thinking about can help give you a different kind of voice from a lot of other people who are just doing hot takes on a topic. So that's one example. So kind of carrying yourself as an academic and, in your public facing thing can be valuable. And I guess that's probably the main thing, honestly. Other than if you're comfortable with data, statistics, if you're able to marshal a bunch of kinds of information, references, historical examples, things like this that other people just don't have at their fingertips because they're not specialists in this topic in the way you are, then those are other kind of value adds that you bring to the table. And then I guess the last thing is editors are often eager to publish someone who is in fact a subject matter on a given topic. So if you're a professor of X at Y university and you're producing an essay on X topic, that's going to reflect well for the credibility of the magazine or news outlet that they're having someone who's an expert on this topic, opine on this topic as compared to just having hot take person deliver hot take on this. So your connection with an institution of higher learning is something that is valued by publishers as long as you're writing in a way that isn't too nerdy. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
All right. Well, I'll give everyone else the rest of their evening back. Thank you so much for joining me. And as Nicole said, I'm around.
Thanks,
Oh,
everyone.
sure.
Thank
Andrea,
you.
go ahead.
Oh.
Yep. Bye.